Today, we have Trip Barthel as our speaker. And as you can see from his bio here, he's really quite accomplished in the field of mediation. This is something that he's been very interested in and has been working on for quite a long time. He's been teaching it since 1997. He's taught at universities and such, not only in Nevada, where he lived for a long time, but also in India and China, and has given training programs in Hong Kong, Philippines, Thailand, Malaysia, India, Russia, the Czech Republic, and England. So he's really traveled around the world quite a lot. He's been the founder and past executive director of the Neighborhood Mediation Center in Reno, has conducted over 400 mediations, 50 arbitrations, and has trained over 3,000 people in courses on these subjects ranging from 2 to 40 hours in length, the various courses. He's also written 2 Baha'i books, Golden Choices and Dynamic Consultation. So I want to welcome Trip today and thank him in advance for offering this marvelous web talk to us today. Trip, take it over.
Let me tell you a little bit about what we'll be doing today as we get set up with the slides. We're going to take a look at the writings on creativity and the science of creativity and some very practical ways to bring that into consultation. What I always tell people, that you're really not the most creative when you're 9 people sitting around a table talking, and we'll see the science behind that. And we'll see that the writings actually support that science. The writings always have been predicting the science in the field I work in facilitation and mediation. And as Baha'is, I think sometimes we end up mimicking the outside world and not necessarily looking to our own writings for guidance. Let me take a look at that. We'll be taking a look at that today in several different ways, in ways that I hope are also very practical. So when I say it's more of a web shop than a webinar, I mean that we're more of a way to work together and explore different skill sets that are consistent and complementary to the writings and the science. As I said, during this webinar, there will be several times to respond to activities. Those of you that might have seen other webinars I've done or training in person, you know it's not all about sitting and listening. So even in webinars, I try to be interactive. And when you do respond, obviously limit your responses to just a few words and take time to read what others have to say regarding that same activity. I think we learn more when we learn together and when we learn from one another. So I've got a number of slides today that may generate different types of creative thoughts, and I thought this was a great slide. This was a little subcompact car with everything you need for camping stacked on top of it, which I thought was very imaginative, but not quite practical. And so when we talk about imagination today, it has to have those 2 components. It has to be something new and original, but it also has to be something from the world of reality, something that it is possible to do. Now, I don't want to limit possibilities, but I do think that if we focus on the more practical aspects, we can come up with something that is more functional in the initial stages. Let's take a look at the first activity we have for you today. And we all understand that we basically have different modes in our brain. We used to call those hemispheres, right and left brain hemispheres. Now they're saying they're really distinct functions for brain, well, how our brain functions. And we used to think of our left brain as being our sequential, systematic brain, and our right brain as being our creative and emotional brain. The important thing at this activity is that you're going to connect your 2 brains together. And you literally do that. We're going to do that physically. So take your right hand and touch your left knee. Take your left hand and touch your right knee. Take your right hand, touch your left knee. Take your left hand, touch your right knee. Take your right hand, touch your left knee. Take your left hand, touch your right knee. Just that physically crossing hemispheres in our body stimulates the crossing of hemispheres in our brain. Now that's a very simple way to do that. But keep in mind, there's a very physical connection to creativity too. So we connect our brains, we're looking to bring all sides together. And one of the ways to do that is through kinesthetics, through the how our body works and functions. So we've connected our brains. Now we're going to move to recognizing the most difficult problems require the most creative solutions. And so in this session, we're going to connect the writings, the science, and the practice of creativity and show how to apply it in consultation. We're going to take a look at a couple of different specific aspects today, and hopefully today you'd be able to leave with some practical activities that help promote more creativity in consultation. Or in, as a matter of fact, not just consultation, in any form of group or individual creativity. So let's begin by saying that with the writing, man also has spiritual powers. This is from Some Answered Questions when Abdu'l-Baha talks about our physical and our spiritual powers. And he talks about imagination, which conceives things, thought, which reflects upon reality, comprehension, which comprehends realities, memory, which retains whatever man imagines, thinks, and comprehends. But as you can see, it begins in imagination. And I've always felt that imagination is what connects to the common faculty, which connects to the spiritual realm. But again, that's just my thinking. I think imagination is what we see in what we call a restive state, MRI. In other words, with no other physical stimulus, our brain is active. It's active in the way I think of as a spiritual switchboard, that our brain is literally in constant contact with our spirit. So the intermediary, though, between the 5 outward powers and the inward powers, remember the inward powers are what we just saw with imagination, comprehension, thought, and memory, but the intermediary between the 5 outward powers and the inward powers is the sense in which they possess in common. That is, the sense which acts between the outer and inner powers conveys to the inward powers whatever the outer powers discern. It is termed the common faculty, or in other parts of the writings, it's also called the sympathetic nerve, because it communicates between the outward and inward powers, and thus is common to the outward and inward powers. And this is the interface for our imagination. So I'd like to begin with an understanding that our imagination is essentially spiritual in character. But as we talk today, I want us to consider 2 forms of creativity. The first form is from an individual perspective, and it's what I call meditation for creation. It's, when the Baha'i Writings will refer to prayer and meditation together, you have to open your mind up to receive the new ideas that might be present. How often have we seen great ideas developed in a more remote setting? You think of I think that the great ideas we developed in science, you think of Einstein and what he developed in his theories of creativity and relativity. He did that in relatively silent individual contemplation and being able to come with that. When you think about the ideas we have that Newton developed, he literally created and developed calculus and the theory for gravitation in isolation because he was forced to leave London due to the plague and retreat out to his family's estate, where he lived in isolation for a period of time. And during that time, he came up with some of the greatest Western scientific mathematical discoveries prior to Einstein. So the first form of creativity is from that meditation. The second form is from a clash of differing opinion. Now, I know quite often we've had a difficult time reconciling those two. How do we meditate and clash at the same time? Well, the answer is we don't. Meditation takes place during its time, and the clash of differing opinion takes place at a separate time. And let me share with you some of the things about the research. What do we know about that? Before we do, here's a couple of quotes I think that really stimulate our mind. Man's mind, once stretched by a new idea, never regains its original dimensions. In other words, we can't unlearn what we've learned, what we know. And then the quote that says, "It is through science that we prove, but through intuition that we discover." Most of the great discoveries have happened in garages rather than in think tanks, in labs. People will try something. The Wright brothers went out and created an airplane without understanding aerodynamics and how wings work. It wasn't until somebody brought their plane back to the lab and realized they were creating high and low pressure zones on the wing, and that was actually giving it lift. But their idea was not developed in the lab, it was developed through practice, as most great ideas are. There's several books on that that are fascinating. So let's think about this. Here's your first chance to respond, and what we want you to do is go to the question box and just respond right in, and I know it says question there, but write in, when are you most creative? Please respond in a few words on your questions form where it says type the answer. Type when you're most creative. In the shower, we have one. And we're gonna look at these and see that they all have one characteristic as we go through it. People respond. In the middle of the night, we've got someone writing in. Early morning, in nature, in my car early morning before I sleep, soon after I wake up, when I have nothing to do, when I are faced with a problem, in dreams, when I am not trying to be creative, I may be more creative. In silent motion, cleaning, in early morning, in the shower again. So you can see, from your responses, intuitively we know that we're most creative. Oops. We're most creative in isolation. Most people say they're creative between sleeping and waking, in nature and meditating. They actually found that if you want people to be more creative, and we'll go through the science of that in just a minute, but one period of sleep, people were able to be 40% more creative when they've given control groups and people napping a puzzle to solve. The people that have had the nap are 40% more creative following that. But most people say they're more creative with sleeping and waking, in nature and meditating. Einstein has a great story on that, though. He talks about when he would sit in his laboratory, he would take a nap in a chair, and he'd put some marbles in his hand. And as he fell asleep, his hand would open and the marbles would fall to the floor, and they would wake him up. And he would write down whatever he was thinking at the time. So the first lesson we have for individual creativity is isolation. So don't think in a meeting with people in group, and we'll see in a minute why group brainstorming has been disproved as an effective model, or it certainly is a less effective model for generating ideas. The key to creativity is isolation. This is from a video which I will have to act out for you, but you can download it for free on iTunes, just because we don't really have the capacity in this platform to share a video. But it's a video called Brainstorming. And he begins the video by saying, brainstorming is the most widely implemented creativity of all time. The only problem with it is it doesn't work. Psychologists have known since the 1950s that brainstorming is not as effective as individuals working alone. That people working as a group come up with fewer and less original ideas than those same people working independently. So actually with brainstorming, we become less than the sum of our parts. And what we know that an individual isolated reflection is 40% more effective, both in the quantity of ideas and in the creativity of those ideas than we are in a group. And there are a number of reasons for that. We have anchoring bias. We have things that we know scientifically that restrict a group's natural ability to be creative. But the first key is isolation. So that means if you want to be creative, prayer and meditation, take a moment of silence. People will generate much more creative ideas. And I'll show you how I do that in mediation and facilitation. But the video goes on to say that group work is best done once ideas have been generated. So remember we talked about the two forms of creativity. The first is meditation in isolation. The second is a clash of differing opinion, that a vigorous debate leads to 25 to 40% more ideas and more original ideas. So literally, the least effective way to generate ideas is in a group brainstorming method. The other two methods we've just talked about here, individuals in isolation and having a vigorous debate, generates 25 to 40% more and original ideas. The difference between the traditional brainstorming model and a vigorous debate, in traditional brainstorming, what's your one rule? Never criticize the idea of another. Never criticize another idea. And the contention in the studies that have been done is that, yes, we should be criticizing ideas. That's how you make better ideas. That just having a listing of ideas does not get us the best. So if you want the best ideas, generate them in isolation, vigorously debate them with a clash of differing opinion, where we discuss the opinions, again, the idea and not the person. And that's where detachment becomes key. So, creativity part one. I thought it would be fun to take a look at the science of creativity in relation to a talk. And this is from Abdu'l-Baha in London, Sunday, January 12th, 1913. And the scientific quotes are taken from a book called Imagine. Now, I have to mention, the book called Imagine was pulled off of the shelves. It was a wonderful book that Jason Lair, a technical writer, wrote. But they pulled the book from the shelves because they found that he used material that he had previously written without acknowledging it. It still doesn't change the research presented in the book, but you might have a difficult time finding this particular book, but the research in it is certainly valid. I'm not going to quote the specific research in this, but if you do have questions on that, I can refer you to those sources. So let's take a look at creativity and the book Imagine. So we begin with Abdu'l-Baha saying the sign of the intellect is contemplation, and the sign of contemplation is silence, because it is impossible for a man to do two things at one time. He cannot both speak and meditate. The book Imagine says divergent thinking is generally associated with an inward focus, and an inward focus is necessary for creative solutions. So right off the bat, you can see the science is telling us we also need that inward focus. It's an axiomatic fact that while you meditate, you are speaking with your own spirit. And what does Imagine tell us? Imagine tells us that dreams enable our creativity, and divergent thinking trusts spontaneous epiphanies. That in that state of mind, you put certain questions to your spirit, and the spirit answers. The light breaks forth, and the reality is revealed. And here we see subjects who dreamed during a nap resolved 40% more puzzles than a control group that did not nap. So we can see that we have an advantage in our spiritual connection. You cannot apply the name man to any being devoid of this faculty of meditation. Without it, he would be mere animal, lower than the beasts. And Abdu'l-Baha also tells us that we can suspend everything within ourselves, within our body, except two things. That's thought and reflection. That those are two things that in many ways define life. But without it, he'd be mere animal. That alpha waves direct our attention inward for insights. That we literally are built with this capacity. The spirit of man is itself informed and strengthened during meditation. Through its affairs of which man knew nothing are unfolded before his eyes. Through it he receives divine inspiration. Through it he receives heavenly food. I love this science that says a steady rhythm of alpha waves is predictive of solving an insight puzzle up to 8 seconds before the insight arrives. And I think this is our common faculty making its way into our conscious mind. Meditation is the key for opening the doors of mysteries. In that state of mind, man abstracts himself. In that state of mind, man withdraws himself from all outside objects. In that subjective mood, he is immersed in the ocean of spiritual life and can unfold the secrets of things in themselves. And the science tells us that before we can have a breakthrough, there has to be a block. That breakthroughs and blocks work together. In other words, if we want to have deeper insights, we have to hit the wall first. And what literally happens in our brain normally resides on the left side where we've got our daily routine and kind of our daily planner scheduled. When we hit something that we can't resolve, that we don't know what to do with, we'll automatically shift into our right brain. And I think the blocks happen in our left brain, and we have to more or less jump over the wall of those blocks into our right brain, into a more creative brain, to be able to find those solutions. To illustrate this, Abdu'l-Baha goes on, think of man as endowed with two kinds of sight. When the power of insight is being used, the outward power of vision does not see. The faculty of meditation frees man from the animal nature, discerns the reality of things, puts man in touch with God. So we know scientifically that 30 seconds before the answer erupts into consciousness, there's a spike of gamma wave rhythm. We know the answer before we realize we know the answer. I mean, we've seen this, now with MRIs. And as I said before, I think the MRIs are an indication of that common faculty. But that's just speculation on my part, but I think they're an indication of that spiritual material interface. This faculty brings forth from the invisible plane the sciences and arts. Through the meditative faculty, inventions are made possible, colossal undertakings are carried out. Through it, governments can run smoothly. Through this faculty, man enters into the very kingdom of God. And what do we know? We know the source of every new idea is the same. A network of neurons shifts into an unfamiliar pattern. So each creative act literally reshapes our brain, that we're able to form connections that hitherto did not exist. In many ways, that's maybe the gift of this dispensation in capacities of man, is an ability to form a broader network of connections. I think to go from B and E, 2 connections, to go to 27 connections, I think is what the writings say, is what we have now. So literally more than if you want to do that factorially or exponentially, an increase, on several orders of magnitude, being able to use our brain in a much higher level. The meditative faculty is akin to the mirror. If you put it before the earthly objects, it will reflect them. Therefore, if the spirit of man is contemplating earthly subjects, he will be informed of these. And one of the quotes I like, that not necessarily go with this, but that happy people, what they found is happy people are much better at guessing, that it does have an emotional intelligence component. I think what we know about emotional intelligence is people in better moods, people in more positive frames of mind are more creative and expansive. So one of the stages, if you want to be more creative, get happy. You can get happy watching a video, doing things that bring you joy. You'll find yourself more creative. I know for sure one of the things that lead to conflict are people that are in distraught frames of mind, people that are not in a happy frame. And one of the goals I have in the work I do in conflict resolution is to help people think differently about the situation that they're facing. So there is no human being untouched by these two influences, pain and sorrow. But all the sorrow and grief that exist come from the world of matter. The spiritual world bestows only the joy. And again, once again, bringing up the fact that when we're spiritually connected, we just feel better. We feel more joyful. And so I think that's the importance of connecting prayer with meditation. I think prayer promotes a more positive feeling, and I think that more positive feeling gives us a stronger connection in meditation. That laughter happens And this is from a book that was probably 40 years old before we had any of the brain science, but a fascinating book. It says, laughter happens when two formerly disconnected ideas come together. And that's from The Act of Creation, the book called The Act of Creation. So we need to look to connect the items that, well, the highest level of thinking in Bloom's taxonomy is creativity and synthesis. That we're at the highest level of thinking when we bring together ideas that may have been formerly unconnected and see different ways to bring those together. But if you turn the mirror of your spirits heavenwards, the heavenly constellations and the rays of the sun of reality will be reflected in your hearts, and the virtues of the kingdom will be obtained. And what do we know? We know that more daydreaming scores higher on creativity. So if you work in a creative job, a creative profession, and your boss asks you what you're doing, and you say, well, I'm daydreaming, your boss should say, yes, way to go. We need more creative ideas. But we know this. This is the science. You don't get more creative ideas when you put people in a room and put them under a great deal of stress. So that's creativity part one. We're going to come back to that in just a second. Creativity part two, as we talked about, is that clash of differing opinion. And shining spark of truth cometh forth only after the clash of differing opinion. But also the light of reality becomes apparent when two opinions coincide. So as those opinions start to come together, we start to see a solution. Let's talk a little bit more about that clash of differing opinion. So again, let's talk about this. Let's get your responses in a group, because this is always interesting. When are you most creative in a group? Go ahead back to your question bar and share some of your responses. When are you most creative in a group? When are you most creative in a group? When there is joy. Yeah, when people feel good, they're happy. One of the signs I look for, I do a lot of work with groups, and one of the signs I look for is laughter. If I hear laughter, I know they're starting to be creative. When having fun. When I feel safe to speak. When my ideas are accepted. When there is trust. I'm sorry, getting some of these are, let's see, how do I expand this? Oh, there we go. Oh, good. When they don't come with a preconceived agenda, right? When you're detached, when you don't feel like you have to take ownership or defend. When I feel relaxed and heard. When I feel comfortable in a trusting environment. When provided opportunities to connect with the I'm assuming this is with the Word of God. In a smaller group, sometimes size, people may not be as creative. When people are all allowed to offer opinions, when there's a safe space, when I sense a problem like a puzzle needs to be addressed. One of the classic problem-solving movie clips that I love is from Apollo 13. And you may remember in the movie, the Apollo lunar module is headed toward the moon and an oxygen tank explodes, and leaving them with a big problem to solve. And at that point in the movie, the director of the flight operations for NASA comes in and has a big cardboard box and dumps it out on the table and says, this is what we have to work with. How do we save them? First of all, he framed it at a very high level. It's not how do we fix it, how do we save them? What are all the things we can do to save them? And that's the first key in creativity, is framing the issue at a higher level that allows you more choices. And so he didn't express it in terms of blame or guilt or this is what you did wrong. He said, this is what we have to work with. How do we save them? So going back to our list of folks responding, when I sense a problem needs to be solved. Finding something that worked. So when are you most creative in a group? Now, this is one of those cases where I don't know that there's, we understand for individual creativity you need isolation. I don't know in this model if I can give you a hard and fast rule, but what I do say here is most people say they're most creative in a group when there is laughter, when there's vigorous debate, focused energy, full engagement. You know, it's a safe environment. And that gets back to creating the guidelines that you set for discussion. Now, a couple of these things that I've mentioned are part of what I teach in dynamic consultation. And so today, this is only one of the 9 stages I teach in dynamic consultation on creativity. But coming up, starting with clear guidelines that offer a safe, productive, efficient, and fun environment. That's key. Promoting emotionally intelligent questions where people care about one another. Defining the issue in broader terms. Focusing on the unity of the group and working together to solve something. This gets us to higher levels of creativity too. So this is going to be an activity for you watching at home, your studio audience today. You don't have to take a blank piece of paper. You take whatever piece of paper you have, or you can just think through this activity. But I want you to, in a moment, I'm just going to be silent just for maybe 30 seconds, and I want you to reflect on firesides, on what a fireside means to you, and in silence, just kind of write down that idea. And I'll ask you to write it down just because that will follow through with the kind of the rest of the activity. But in silence, write down the one best idea on fireside you'd like to share, and I'll give you about 30 seconds to do that. I should be singing the Jeopardy theme song here. Da, 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 da. Okay, that's enough time. Okay, the point is take time in isolation. Okay, focus on a broader definition of the issue, and really access your spiritual self. Now, you may not come up with something every time. I say you don't have to come up with something every time. Maybe only 1 or 2 people are really inspired, but you have to allow for that. You have to allow for that period of meditation. Now, in this activity, and I'll tell you the latest research on this here in just a second. This is a particular creativity activity I've been teaching in many different communities. Probably 50 or 60 communities in the U.S. and Canada. Actually, in Europe, I just gave a program in Milan at the EBBF conference, in London, in China, India. I teach this to my Chinese students who taught this in India. And the one, I'll give you the story that goes along with this, wasn't even with a North American culture, and it worked particularly effectively. So you've written down your one best idea on the fireside. Now you have to picture yourself sitting in a group of, say, 8 other people, and sharing that idea. And what I ask you to do here is just pass the idea to the person on your right. And what would you do to improve that idea? Okay, now I know this is a virtual classroom and you have to think this up, but I want you to try it the next chance you get. It can be on anything. Pass it around and look at each idea, how would you improve it, and just keep passing ideas maybe 6 or 7 times, and you'll notice as you do this, what happens to your idea? You know, raise your hand. It's no longer there. It's been changed. What is the idea you have in front of you? It's someone else's idea that's been improved on. Been improved on many different ways. Who participated in this activity? You know, you have that. Everyone was allowed to participate. Were they allowed to participate equally? Yes. One of the great challenges in group brainstorming is, first of all, there's an anchoring bias, which means you go toward the first thing that's mentioned. But the other aspect of that is it tends to be dominated. One of the challenges in groups working together is to get past the individual that feels the need to dominate a particular aspect of consultation. And I don't even mean that in a bad way. I mean, they really feel they have something important to say, and they'd like to say it. But everyone has something important to say. And when you do this in a group, say you've got a group of 12 people passing around, you can generate 12 ideas and 6 other people, so 72 comments in about 5 or 6 minutes. And I asked folks, how long would it take you to do that verbally? And people say, oh, that would take, you know, a couple hours to do that. And yet we've got better ideas based on the science. We've got ideas that have been initially vigorously debated in this group activity, but we've done it in silence. And so everyone is allowed to participate. So this is called brainwriting. Let's take a look at the science of this for a second. Oh, let me talk about the example of when I used this. I was working with 3 different Native American tribes together who had a joint reservation with an education department. And they were having a great deal of conflict with their educational system. So they asked me to come in and see if I could help resolve conflict. Well, the more I practice conflict resolution, the more I realize it has nothing to do with resolving conflict. It has everything to do with creating a better future. So I asked, we sat around in a circle. We had about 30 people. We had a pretty good crowd. I said, let's bring our chairs in a circle. And we began with a native blessing. And with that blessing, then, I asked everybody to take out a piece of paper and write down your one best idea for the education department. They all sat and thought about it because they knew pretty well. Each person always usually has their own solution, some idea they like to share. Said your one best idea. Then I said, okay, now pass this to the person on the right, and how would you make this idea even better? And I always tell people they don't have to add anything. They don't have to write anything at all. But if they're inspired to do so, feel free to write whatever you'd like to. And then we passed it again. And then we passed it again. And we passed it 7 times for 7 generations. And after that, I said, take these ideas, group them, and post them on the board, and name them, and in whatever way you want. And so people went up, and actually that vigorous debate starts to happen as people see ideas in the groupings. And so we ended up with I think about 6 different groups of ideas, and then we just did a prioritization vote, and we came up with a way to give priority to those particular groupings. And so in less than 30 minutes, we had a completely prioritized agenda for creating a better future. Now, we could spend a lot of time talking about the past, but we're not going to repair it. And we could have a lot of blame, a lot of guilt, but it's not going to help us into the future. What I tell folks is we process the past as we create the future. If you want people to work together, if you want people to be part of something new and different, if you want people to be engaged, you need to give them a reason and a feeling. Making a better education department and really promoting a more positive feeling about the future. I always tell groups that I work with, there's always at least one optimist in the room, and that optimist is me sometimes. Well, it's always me, but it may be some others too. So let's take a look at brainwriting. Oh, so this is the formula that I use for creativity. It's detach, imagine, debate, decide. And you have to detach from several different things. You have to detach from everything you're bringing into the room with you. Your feelings, your ideas, you know, any aspects of what might be going on here. You have to be willing to imagine a new and better future and then debate that future openly and honestly. Now, the advantage those cards have in what we just did in brainwriting, no one has to defend themselves. We just have ideas up there, and we have ideas that everybody's looking at. No one owns any idea, and every idea has already been consulted on by at least 7 other people. They've had a chance to look at it. You've taken out the ability of the single person to come in and more or less bias or anchor or dominate the idea generation stage, and everybody participates with an equal footing. Hang on, let me go back to the, oh, here we go, I went through this last time. So brainwriting in this is called brainwriting in the studies that have been done on it recently. It's generally credited with generating 20% more ideas and 42% more original ideas as compared to traditional brainstorming. And the author also says that there's not a single published study in which a face-to-face brainstorming group outperforms a brain writing group, and saying that the process leads to more diverse and candid ideas. And under discussion with brainwriting, it says the discussion should only take place after the group has generated a variety of distinct ideas with which to work. That raw ideas rarely work. We have to understand that the starting point is not the finish line, but it gives us a chance to be able to bring out into discussion new and different approaches. That it's the permutation and combination of the outlandish and banal that lead to the best proposals. Usually the best idea that is selected at the end isn't exactly what anybody came up with at the beginning. The idea has been edited. The idea has been refined through that clash of different opinions. So that's a vital aspect to what takes place. Ken Robinson, those of you, Ken, I think is, well, he still has the #1 video on TED Talks. I think he's had more than 18 million views just on the TED Talks alone. He has another video on imagination, which I think, and creativity, which I think is also to the point. He says imagination is really just random thoughts. He says it's whatever kind of comes into your mind. I think from Ken Robinson's perspective, imagination, that the clash of differing opinion is what moves imagination into innovation. That innovation is imagination with a purpose. Okay, so it's not just, let's paint all the snails green and let them march up the flagpole together. I have no idea where that came from, but it's let's cook those snails in a buttery sauce and enjoy them for lunch. It's imagination, it's innovation with a purpose. So in closing, from his book, I thought he had several interesting things to share that I think are really appropriate for imagination. He says that 2 years of college is ideal for a creative career. Now, certainly we know that from Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, that they were both they both only made it into college for 2 years. But he said, I guess in studies that have been found, they said if you go 4 years, you tend to get too locked into the way of thinking for that particular profession. The 2 years of college still allow you to think more creatively. Now, that's not to say to cut your career short, but it's to keep in mind that sometimes college limits our ability to be more creative. And here's a fascinating one, that intermediate levels of social intimacy produce the highest levels of creativity. So, for example, I've lived in China for most of the last 8 years, and China has very tight-knit groups of friends. They have very small groups, highly bonded. And there are many reasons they do that, but those groups limit their creativity, that you need to have a loose network, fairly wide-ranging loose network of people if you want to have more creative ideas. That those intermediate levels of social intimacy produce the higher levels of creativity. That more interactions lead to more creativity. And certainly one of the examples from Pixar films, you remember Steve Jobs really started Pixar, and he, at the Pixar studios he had in the Bay Area, they were famous because they only had one set of restrooms and one company cafeteria, because he wanted to bring all the animals to the watering hole where they could just meet and see one another, because he understood that those informal social interactions quite often can lead to the most creative outcomes. What they did find in a study at Bell Labs a number of years ago, they found that some researchers, and these are all folks with Nobel Prizes and the like, some researchers, though, were much more effective in programs than others. And when they really researched it, they found that the scientists that could form social networks were much quicker and much more effective in solving difficult problems. They were able to bring people together quicker, which I thought was a very interesting outcome. That people need to be allowed to come up with ideas independently. That independence is vital, and as Baha'is, we believe in the independent investigation of truth. That level of independence is vital in coming up with more creative solutions. And that finally, people are less likely to explore on their own when they are given explicit instructions. So think of that if we're given the answers, we don't often take time to think of the questions. And having said that, if you're interested more in asking better questions, I recently gave a webinar for the Association for Baha'i Studies on asking better questions, and that's available for a free download on that site. So I think we're at the close of the presentation today, but we want to stay around for questions from anybody. And Boyd or Rob, I think you're going to come on with questions at this point.
Well, yeah, thanks, Trip, very much for this fascinating presentation about the science of consultation and what we've learned about ways to make it more creative and effective. This really does show the immense power of consultation as a mechanism for social change and community development, and I'm really grateful for that. As I understand it, you want to be able to select the questions yourself and answer them, so I'll turn off my camera and microphone and just leave it to you.
Okay. Okay, folks, now is your time for questions. This is what shows me that you've been paying attention. So for those of you out there in computer land, oh, here we got one. What can be done? This is the one question that always gets asked. The very first one up here. Let me expand my thing so I can see the whole question.
And if you have a slide that you like, Trip, you can go to it or switch some of your quotes, for example. Just a thought.
Okay. How do I widen the question field here to see the entire question? Is my question. I have a question
between question and answer. There's a
and I've widened that to the maximum level. It's not letting me widen it anymore, and I can't widen the box anymore either. So let's see. Let me try that. Yeah,
click on the question. Click on the question, and it might, as if you're going to respond to it, and it should pop up in the box below.
Oh, okay. What can be done when there is a control person in the circle? That is the big question right there. One of the greatest challenges in any group decision-making process is the extent to which individuals are willing to listen to one another. That's why in the model I have for dynamic consultation, I begin with emotional intelligence. I begin with empathy. If you want empathy, you have to give empathy. You have to be willing to listen. You have to be willing to listen well to what somebody's had to say. But this is also where ground rules come in. And the ground rules might say that the group would develop together that we need to try different ways of resolving difficult issues. What are the different ways we can do that? And even what I demonstrate in dynamic consultation are the non-verbal ways. When there's a control person, if you can get it outside of verbal, you can change the conversation. And I show several different techniques, one of which is what we just did, brain writing. If somebody's controlling, say, hey, let's all write down our best idea and pass it around. Even if you don't pass it around, just writing it down and sharing it gets everybody involved in the process. So, but the two things I would say on a control person are taking it outside of verbal and having ground rules that help address that situation. See the videos that I have on YouTube. I've got 12 videos on dynamic consultation, and I think that will answer some of the questions. Most of the examples of people with creativity don't seem to be people who have been able to solve the most important problems. How can such people be persuaded to listen to others who may be able to solve the important problems? Well, I think, I hate to say this, there is no I in creativity. No, there is an I in creativity. There is no I in the clash of differing opinion. That it really begins, and I didn't get into that today, but it begins with emotional intelligence. It begins in being willing, setting the stage where people are willing to listen. having the expectation that we will listen to one another, that we will share, that we will discuss, we will be open to what's being said, and that we will work together in the most productive way possible. I'm not sure when it says most of the examples of people with most creativity don't seem to be people who have been able to solve the most important problems. And Shala, I don't know if you can share any more about that question. I'll come back to that if you can. The only way to persuade to listen to others is you have to listen yourself. You have to be what you expect to see in others. Can you explain the issue of framing the issue at a higher question? This is the key. If you want more choices, have a better frame. And the frame is the starting point for solving the problem. Okay? The frame is the big picture. The frame is the question. Paul Lample gives a great, although he's not talking about framing, but he gives a great example of framing in the audio tapes that are on the national website. He talks about people having a conflict between should we use, the Baha'i Center for programs or homes for programs. And he's saying that we need to rise above that dichotomy and say, how can we promote the spiritual life of the community? And that is a great reframe, and the frame is the question that everyone agrees with. So when you say, how can we work together to promote the spiritual life of the community, everybody agrees with that. Now, everyone may not agree with how can we hold programs in the Baha'i Center or how can we hold programs in homes, so you raise the question to a higher level. That's what framing does. And when you do that, you get more choices. Is brainwriting the most effective way to foster universal participation? I would say there are many effective ways to foster universal participation. To me, though, think outside of the spoken word if you want universal participation. The example I gave with the Native American tribe, where we passed around 30 people passing around ideas through 7 stages, that's 210 different ideas. The time it would have taken us to discuss that, and they all acknowledged it. I mean, I gave a lot of programming for Native American communities. They acknowledged that. They appreciated the fact that we were able to generate more information more efficiently, more quickly, in a better way. But I think, to me, universal participation, there are, well, what I call spectrums is another way for universal participation in resolving a difficult issue. And it's recognizing the distance between yes and no. And as when we say that without unanimity, we may take a vote. Well, I've got at least 8 other ideas you can do before between the unanimity and taking a vote, to really get us to unanimity. So brainwriting is one of the most effective, I think brainwriting is one of the easiest and most effective ways for creativity, but there are other ways for universal participation. Just putting flip charts around the room and having people write on them, having people draw a picture together of what they see in the community. Any ways that get people involved, small discussion groups. Just have people talk in pairs. They're all participating. They don't all have to, everything doesn't have to be done by the whole group at the same time, is what I'm saying. That at the end it ultimately does, but get people to be part of the process. And let me go back. Shala, let's see, you talked about most people don't seem to be able to solve the important problems. With the examples that I gave. Hey, what can I say? I'm a consultant. I only give the examples that work. Most of the examples, let's see. Let me give you another non-verbal, or that begins non-verbally. It's a process I call reciprocal negotiation. And it involves 2 people, but you can also do it with groups. I ask each party to sit down in silence, essentially in meditation, and write down what they are willing to do. In other words, what am I willing to do? And what would I like to ask someone else to do or the other party to consider doing? So I'm making a unilateral commitment, a non-contingent unilateral commitment to do something. All I'm requesting is they consider doing what I'm asking. What happens in that, I had several instances with that, where one woman came up to me and said, gee, I only had one thing I was willing to do, but I had 10 things I wanted the other party to do. And she said, I realized then I had more obligations that I really wasn't acknowledging. And the real key is in acknowledging beyond yourself, getting people to consider the world outside of themselves. Okay, it is really the essence in everything I do. Once they're willing to really truly listen to what others have to say, then I know we can make progress. That's why in my model and dynamic consultation, I begin with empathy. I begin with truly caring and listening to what somebody else has to say. There's a simple ground rule you can do for empathy with meetings. You could say, please summarize what the person speaking has just said before you share what you would like to say. That way you get beyond and everybody wanting to just speak. They have to listen first when they do that. Let me go down with some other questions here. Some people are more creative than others. It is important to give them time to express it. Absolutely. We all have different capacities. Brainstorming, you know, in this particular model of brain writing, what I tell folks is don't limit yourself to one idea. You may start out with one, but if other ideas occur to you, write them down. It's an unlimited, it's an open bucket. Write down as many ideas as you would like the group to share. The only filter I put into the discussion is it's got to be positive. You know, don't write down we should stop doing this and this and this. Fine, we'll stop doing it, but what are we going to start doing? What are we going to do? I approach it from an appreciative inquiry standpoint and not from a punishment and guilt standpoint. Someone gets offended. How can this be avoided so consultation can continue? Well, I'll tell you, in the ground rules, again, we go back to ground rules. We don't often think about it. That's what it tells us. Abdu'l-Baha tells us the second condition. The first condition is love and harmony among the members. The second condition is to lay down guidelines and bylaws for their meetings and discussions. Okay, we never do that, or rarely do that. In all the communities I've visited, maybe 10% of the Baha'i communities, and don't think that developing distinctive Baha'i communities gives you guidelines. It gives you the starting point, but in my book, I've got probably 30 or 40 different guidelines to consider from probably 5 or 6 different processes. The thing about consultation, what we don't realize about consultation, Baha'is had an exclusive use of consultation up until 40 or 50 years ago. Then the rest of the world started to catch on. The science of consultation affirms everything in the writings, and the rest of the world is starting to do consultation because that's what the science shows. What Baha'is don't realize is the large amount of practice out there that is absolutely consistent with consultation and that is bypassing consultation with much better ideas, and we need to start catching up with that. So you avoid that through the guidelines you lay down. That's why guidelines are vital. I love the brain writing exercise as a way of sharing, improving ideas quietly and avoiding anchoring and limiting domineering behavior. That's exactly what it does. As someone who often works with nonprofit boards, I've done a lot of work with nonprofit boards, so a group of people with diverse faiths, but theoretically a common support of the organization's mission to help them work together better and grow the organization. Do you have other suggestions on creating connection and listening in a pragmatically time-limited 2 or 3 hour workshop? Yeah, I've done a lot of work with groups. Time, the one aspect about consultation, and maybe we'll start working toward a close with this. The one aspect about consultation we don't often consider, we should be much more efficient in our consultation. Our consultation tends to be all verbal and just random. If nothing else, just use 6 thinking hats. It's a wonderful model of consultation, much more productive than your typical discussion, and it gets people to better, more complete answers in whatever they're trying to solve. So you know what I tell folks is, would you rather go to a doctor that has read the writings on medicine, or a doctor that's read the writings on medicine and gone to med school? It's the same thing. There is a science to consultation. We do know how consultation become more effective. That's what I'm trying to do in the work that I do, is show the science that's out there and start to bring that into the work we do. There's no reason not to. The writings are absolutely wonderful, and they create what I call the perfect foundation for a discussion on which we can build many wonderful and beautiful structures. But what I tell folks about guidelines, guidelines should be wings, not handcuffs. Guidelines should promote the efficiency of our consultation. I've got many stories on how I could make consultation more efficient, but let me just check in with Rob. Rob, I think we're probably getting close to the point where we need to think about, unless other folks have questions. I've answered the questions that I see. If you've got any last questions now, now's your chance to type them in. And see
well, Richard has one here about prayer. You might want to answer that one, and then perhaps we'll use that as our last question. How's that?
Oh, okay. Oh, hey, Giddy, I see you on there. Nice to see you. We're back east right now. I would like to have the group move beyond the common answer of saying a prayer and move to ideas that we can do. Oh, well, now that's why the writings, it's just not praying. It's just not prayer. It's prayer and meditation. It's focused prayer. It's prayer with a purpose, okay? So let's stop and pray about this issue. Let's stop and pray for guidance. Focus the prayer and think about it, and in allow for the period of silence. Quite often we'll say a prayer and say, okay, on with business now. No. You need to take a prayer, and then we need to take a period of silence. And it's in that period of silence that Abdu'l-Baha says that we may be informed. Either that or have everybody take a nap, because we know we're 40% more productive after we take a nap. But all of the science supports the meditative and dreamlike states that are found in the writings on creativity.
Thank you very much, Trip. This is a fantastic set of suggestions, and I love the energy and enthusiasm when you're addressing everybody spontaneously. I think it really gives everybody a sense of the possibilities for having further discussion. And I, again, very much appreciate this contribution to our web talks, and I'm sure many people will be happy to watch this in the future. If we can switch the control now back to my screen. So here we have the upcoming talks, and I thought everyone would like to know, we have finally finalized our August talk on August 28th. Giulio Savi, who's a member of the National Spiritual Assembly of Italy, will be talking about the amazing Baha'i community in Paris in the 1890s and first decade of the 20th century. And this incredible cultural capital of Europe and the amazing people who were attracted to the faith there, some of whom you may not even be aware they became Baha'is in Europe, such as Agnes Alexander, who established the faith in Hawaii, who first heard of faith in Italy, and Horace Holly is another example. So, of course, really quite a lot of very important Baha'is came out of that community, and their energy to spread the faith around the world is something historically quite amazing. So we'll have Giulio Savi on August 28th. On the 25th of September, Todd Lawson's going to talk about the notion of Joseph in the Baha'i and Baha'i writings and how it goes all the way back through the Quran and ultimately to the Old Testament story of Joseph and Jacob and the very powerful metaphors about Joseph, which I think people will be fascinated by. Roshan Danesh will be speaking on Baha'i law on October 16th. Jenna Khodadad will talk about her father, Zekrullah Khadem, on November 6th. I still don't have the December slot finalized. I have someone I think is available, but I don't have the date yet. And then in January, Annette Reynolds will be speaking about Trudy White and her effort to spread the faith in South Carolina. Ms. Reynolds has written this book called Trudy and the Baha'is' Spiritual Path in South Carolina. So we will be hearing from her about the spread of the Baha'i faith there. As you may know, it's a state with the second most number of Baha'is and the one place in the United States where the Baha'i faith is the second largest religion. More Baha'is in South Carolina than either Jews or Muslims, and this is quite a remarkable achievement for the the South Carolina Baha'i community. And we'll hear about how that happened back in the 70s. Then, for everyone to remember, we have, of course, quite a few upcoming courses. Islam for Deepening and Dialogue starts in 2 days. Dynamic Consultation, this course by Trip Barthel. We just got a little bit of taste of that particular course in his web talk today, and there's still plenty of spaces for people to sign up for that course. World Order Baha'u'llah is coming up. Introduction to Baha'u'llah's Revelation is coming up. Then a course on the Old Testament starting in July, and we are going to have a total of over 50 courses this year. So we hope people are interested in signing up for them. If you need financial aid, just write us and we can see what we can arrange, because we have plenty of scholarship funds available. For more information about us, of course, go to wilmaninstitute.org, or you'll be able to see this particular presentation eventually on YouTube. We'll have it up probably in a day or two. Phone us at 877-WILMET. It's toll free. So I want to thank everybody again for this 5th Wilmette Institute Web Talk for 2016, and look forward to seeing you all in future web talks as well. Please invite your friends, organize a little web talk party even, and you can, of course, use the recordings for firesides and deepenings later. So we hope this service will prove particularly useful to your communities, and we look forward to continuing to provide this service to the Baha'is and their friends. Thank you, everybody, and have a good day.
Thank you.